May 5th, 1994, Sao Paulo Airport. Brazil is mourning an idol. Ayrton Senna de Silva, Formula One racing driver, killed during a race at the height of his glory and his art. The Brazilians mourn Ayrton, the dazzling, death-defying champion. Brazil cries for Senna, the embodiment of success in a country plagued by economic crises. This success story came to an abrupt end at 300 kilometers an hour on the Imola racetrack in Italy. Pictures of the accident were seen by more than 2 billion television viewers around the world. Perhaps never before has the death of a champion aroused such widespread emotion.
Ayrton Senna's funeral was a national funeral. People who were there were astonished by the strange atmosphere in Sao Paulo, which is usually so boisterous. But that day, there was absolute quiet. They were burying a god.
It was the darkest day in my life, because we couldn't accept that Ayrton Senna, our idol, could possibly die.
In Brazil, the football matches came to a halt. Senna had just died. Players were on their knees on the pitch. It was a terrible shock. Their idol had fallen. Their idol had perished.
There is a certain amount of danger in motor racing. So anytime you go driving, testing or racing, you are exposed to some risks. There are calculated risks and there are unexpected situations that can happen. And you can be gone just in a fraction of a second. So you realize that you're nobody. Suddenly you're nobody. And your life can have an end sudden. This is part of your life, and you either face it in a professional, in a cool manner, or you just drop it, just leave it and don't do it anymore, really. And I happen to like too much what I do to just drop it. I can't drop it. It's part of my life.
It is 3 days before the San Marino Grand Prix, staged in Italy at the Imola racetrack. Ayrton Senna arrives in his private plane from Portugal, where he lives when the Formula One season hits Europe. The Thursday morning is taken up by commercial obligations. The champion is launching a bicycle in his name. At the age of 34, business is taking up more and more of the billionaire's time. But here in Italy, the priority is of a sporting nature. The champion is preparing a major step forward in his career as a racing driver. After a disastrous start to the season, Senna has to win in Imola. It is a crucial year for the Brazilian. He has been world champion 3 times, but the last title came 3 years previously. After 10 years competition, Senna is a Formula One veteran, but he still aims to beat Fangio's record of 5 world crowns. With this objective in mind, just a few months ago, he left McLaren, with whom he had won everything, to join Williams Renault, who won the title last year with Frenchman Alain Prost.
Ayrton was changing teams. He had left McLaren, and at McLaren they have a lot of respect for the drivers. They cherish them. This wasn't the case with Williams, and it isn't the case yet either. It's a British team through and through, and I would describe it as cold. The atmosphere is cold. I say that because Prost, who was with Williams in '93 the year before, told me that. And perhaps that too had an effect on Ayrton, who needed to feel appreciated. Because ultimately Formula One race drivers are very lonely. At the moment you take your position in your car and put your helmet on, you're all alone. So there has to be someone beside you. You have to be able to feel the collective team spirit, where 100 members of the team are there at the Grand Prix alongside you. And I don't know if this was the case with Williams.
He thought he was joining the team which had the best car, because, obviously, his idea was to have the best car and immediately become world champion. But from a technical point of view, he realized that the car was far from being the one he had dreamt of. In fact, the car was pretty tricky at high speed and didn't really inspire much confidence in the driver. Ayrton noticed this very quickly from the first laps he made in testing, and several weeks before the start of the season, he knew it was going to be very difficult.
The car wasn't a great technical success. It was a car that could potentially be quick, but the margin for exploiting its possibilities was extremely limited, and only a really gifted driver, in my view, would be able to drive it within that very narrow window.
I remember well, he came to me in testing and said, the car is really difficult to drive and there's something wrong on the car in the way how the aerodynamics works. We have to improve it. The car is not competitive at the moment. Even so, he managed to put the car in pole position in the beginning of '94. So, but that was him, that was not the car.
When he arrives at Imola, Senna has perhaps not yet tamed his new machine, but he is still the indisputable king of qualifying. An exercise in pure speed, where only the fastest over a single lap has the right to first place on the starting grid. Senna has but one challenge: to go faster than the others. This need for speed has been in his blood for 20 years, since his first go-kart race and first victory at the age of 14 back home in Sao Paulo. It was a time when Ayrton spent many hours in the workshop of Lucio Pascual Gascon, known as Che, his first mechanic, and a privileged witness to the young genius's exploits.
This is an historic photo because it shows me waving the checkered flag in front of a driver. And later, people would know it was the famous Ayrton Senna. I liked him because he was a quiet boy. He gave his all because he was doing what he loved. He took to the track with the aim of winning, and he got used to winning and winning and winning.
From the 70s onwards, victory accompanied victory for Senna, and for his emblematic helmet, designed by Sid Mosca, the man who created the Brazilian's image on the track. The brilliant yellow helmet has for years symbolized fear and defeat for his adversaries.
Ayrton was supposed to take part in his first go-kart world championship and had to wear the Brazilian colors, like this, yellow and green. I decided to make the yellow more dominant, as it's the younger color and more vivid. The way I saw Ayrton driving, it was as if the bands of color were coming from his eyes. His driving position is like this. It's very aggressive. Ayrton has always been a very aggressive driver, always hungry for victories.
Senna is a born competitor. His will to win and his strokes of genius have created a legend and an aura. But talent is not enough. If he is here in 1994 with 41 Grand Prix wins, a living legend in motor racing, it is through perseverance and perfectionism. In the autumn of his career, his success almost overshadows the fact that nothing came easy for the future champion.
It was interesting and remarkable to see this boy who was so fragile, so thin, with such penetrating eyes, and knew what he wanted in life. In the beginning, he couldn't even run. We worked on his stamina on the athletics track and on his resistance to adverse situations, his resistance to frustration. Often, when he'd done about 40 laps and was just about to finish, I would say, Ayrton, 10 more laps. And at the end of the training session, he would say, at that moment when you said 10 more laps, I wanted to kill you. I couldn't go on. I wanted to stop. It wasn't fair of you. But I wanted to improve his ability to put up with frustration.
Reaching beyond the limits. Like in Monaco in 1988, when Senna, in a state of grace, dominated qualifying and made his mark in the history of motor racing.
In pursuit of the best lap time, he kept improving until the point when he himself explained that he went into a kind of zone that he had never experienced before, a kind of tunnel. He had the impression he wasn't completely in control of the situation. He was going faster and faster in the zone, but in a moment of lucidity, he decided to stop in the pits and not drive anymore that day.
It was almost beyond what was human, and in some ways it was characteristic of his physical being and presence. Because when he would tell you about his qualifying laps, with that look in his eyes and his angelic face, it was quite awe-inspiring. I would say that from that point of view, he was one of the drivers who have made the greatest impression on me.
It is above all when the heavens open up that Senna leaves everyone else speechless. When his opponents spin and skid, the Rain Man seems to perceive what the others cannot see. When the deluge comes, the Brazilian makes the illusion of a sixth sense quite believable.
Here in Brazil today, we have some very romantic and pleasant rain. So let's talk about Ayrton in the rain. Everybody says that he loved racing in the rain, but he hated it. He would tell me, Nuno, it's horrible because I can't see anything in front apart from the tire tracks. But I don't take my foot off the throttle like the others do. That's the courage to commit yourself and to persist by giving the maximum. He was afraid and thought it was horrible racing in the rain, except he didn't slow down. What a show! That was Ayrton doing his special thing.
Que espetáculo! É o Ayrton que está aprontando aí.
The first day of practice. Imola is the third race of the season, and it's time for Senna to show his mettle. He didn't even finish the first two races in Brazil and Japan, both being won by his latest challenger, the young German Michael Schumacher. And yet, as his friends confirm, Ayrton seems rather distant and detached with regard to his unusually lackluster performances. At the age of 34, after 10 fabulous years, is the obsessive loner revealing a more human side?
He was getting bored. We have to admit the truth. He was getting bored, and indeed he said so. That year, TF1 benefited from his commentary over a single lap with the onboard camera. Ayrton recorded his commentary on the Friday morning during a reconnaissance lap, as it were. He talked, he would say. Right, we're leaving the pits, we're coming into this curve, we're changing into fourth gear, we have to brake here, the car has to do this or that, etc.
In the middle of his technical analysis, Ayrton Senna utters a few astounding words. A message for the Frenchman Alain Prost, his eternal rival, now retired from the track.
A special hello to our dear friend Alain in France. We all miss you, Alain.
There were all the others, but the 22 or 23 others didn't count. Only his former deadly enemy counted, the man who was no longer there, who had become a commentator, who was doing something else. And we realized that the Formula One life was no longer the same for Ayrton Senna.
All the problems he had during the start of the season made him aware of the extent to which he really missed Prost. He no longer had that frame of reference that his great rival, Prost, had provided.
Prost and Senna, a duel that has never been seen before in the history of Formula One. A combat at times superb, at others bitter and pernicious. It reached its height in the late 80s when both men were teammates at McLaren. It was open warfare between two immense champions, so close and yet so distant.
Senna's whole approach was different to that of Prost. Prost saw a race not as an ultimate goal, but as a step towards the world title. It took years for Senna to understand that. He saw a race as the race, that he would compete in as an end in itself. So he had to win it. If he didn't win, he wasn't even interested in scoring any points.
A hard-fought duel resembling a Greek tragedy. The Japanese Grand Prix in 1989, a race to decide the world title. Senna starts badly but catches up with Prost. The Frenchman blocks the curve and pushes both cars off the track. Prost abandons. Senna sets off again and wins the race. But judged to be responsible for the accident, Senna is disqualified and Prost is world champion. After the race, Senna openly expresses his resentment, and the hostility between the two men only deepens.
I never caused the accident in Suzuka. I was blamed for everything, and I was penalized for everything. I was treated like a criminal. So, of course, I thought about stopping. I thought about going home, not coming to Australia. But as I said before, racing, competing, is in my blood. It's part of me. It's part of my life. I've been doing it all my life. And it stands up before anything else.
1 year later, hundreds of millions of viewers prepare to witness a second decisive race at Suzuka. Prost is now with Ferrari, and this time he must win to become champion. He makes the better start, but at the very first curve, Senna makes contact. Both cars are out, and by provoking the accident, Senna is world champion.
Our fratricidal battle was a war which served us both in some ways. It was in a sporting context, and perhaps went beyond that context from time to time. But it was so magnificent, so incredible. It will certainly be a long time before we see anything like it, and perhaps we never will. There have been very few, if any, such rivalries in the past.
A special hello to our dear friend Alain in France. We all miss you, Alain.
And so, on this Friday morning in Imola, is Ayrton Senna overcome with nostalgia? The man who has to learn to win without Alain Prost. As the Frenchman prepares to experience the Grand Prix as a commentator alongside Jean-Louis Moncey.
So peace had been made. And now, with the benefit of hindsight, I think that if there was a sign of destiny, then that was it.
Friday, April 29th. The first official qualifying session begins. As usual, Ayrton Senna records the best lap time. The doctor-in-chief of the Grand Prix, Giuseppe Piana, is focused on the extraordinary mechanical ballet when at 1:20, an accident marks the beginning of a nightmarish weekend.
We are arriving at the entrance to the Variante Bassa, the exact spot where, just a few minutes after the beginning of practice, Barrichello's car came in at 240 kilometers per hour. It skidded into the gravel and hit the wall. The car flipped over.
Rubens Barrichello's car is pulverized. The young Brazilian is taken to the racetrack's medical center. The violence of the crash inspires the very worst fears, particularly for his patron in Formula One, Ayrton Senna.
I go into the emergency ward, and who do I see there but Ayrton Senna? I asked him, "How did you get in here?" Through there, in the back. He'd got in by climbing over a 2-meter-high gateway. Then he says, I want to see him. I want to see Rubens. We can't. I want to see him.
Non si può, voglio vedere. Sta bem, ele tá bem. Ele tomou susto, ele tá meio, chocado, mas ele tá bem. Ele não tem nada quebrado, aparentemente. Tá falando normal.
The Brazilian journalists hang on Senna's every word as he reassures the nation about his compatriot's condition. Symbolic of the status he has achieved in his country, as an icon. Through his flair, his victories, and his love for the national flag, Ayrton Senna embodies a Brazil triumphant. He is their finest ambassador.
He habitually waved the Brazilian flag after each victory, demonstrating his patriotism for the nation. A nation with all the qualities to succeed, and which was successful. He showed this to the Brazilians, and it was exactly what they needed.
Whenever possible, the champion returns to his native land to recharge his batteries, vacationing in luxurious villas with a millionaire's toys, relaxation, and water sports. But above all, the demon of the track finds peace among the family clan he cherishes above all. Ayrton Senna has no children. In 1994, Brazil's most eligible bachelor has a girlfriend, but his priority is his job. For the moment, it is with nieces and nephews that he can enjoy the pleasures of childhood again, indulging in games where speed is never completely excluded. Despite his fortune, Ayrton is far from oblivious to the poverty in his country. 2 months before Imola, he shared with his sister an idea for an association for underprivileged children in Brazil. An ambitious project, devised in his offices in Sao Paulo, deliberately located in a working-class neighborhood. It is here that he runs his business affairs, under the watchful eye of Fangio, the absolute reference in Formula One, the only driver whose heritage he perhaps dares to accept. It took many long years for Senna, the boy from Brazil, from Sao Paulo, to realize his dream, taking the checkered flag at the Interlagos racetrack, the scene of his first go-kart races. 3 years before Imola in 1991, he at last claimed victory here, perhaps his most treasured triumph. It was an heroic race, and Senna was pushed beyond his limits. The gearbox in his McLaren was broken, and only 2 or 3 gears were functioning. The Brazilian finished the legendary Grand Prix paralyzed with cramp.
We're in the last lap, and through the onboard radio, we can hear screaming. And all the television commentators were looking at each other, going, "What's happening?" It was Ayrton, screaming because of the pain, because he'd fought all the way to the end. His arms and his hands were paralyzed. And at the same time, it was like a cry of deliverance, because he'd finally won the Brazilian Grand Prix. He'd wanted it so much. It was so important to him, so crucial.
At the end of that year, 1991, Senna is crowned champion for the 3rd time, joining Niki Lauda, Jackie Stewart and Alain Prost in the pantheon of the most honored drivers in racing history. And above all, he is acclaimed as the greatest Brazilian hero. second day of practice, a vital session for qualifying. Barely 24 hours after Rubens Barrichello's accident, drama strikes again. The Austrian Ratzenberger's Simtek Ford flies from a curve at 300 kilometers an hour and crashes into the safety barrier.
L'impatto è stato tremendo.
The impact was enormous. The car spun round 7 or 8 times, and what was left of it, as it had lost 3 wheels, came to a stop here. And I remember the terrible camera images. I mean, the car had just stopped, and I saw the driver's head leaning to the right, and I knew it was a really bad omen.
Roland Ratzenberger, 34 years old, like Ayrton Senna, but with only 53 days of Formula One racing against 10 years for the Brazilian. For the newcomer, the Imola Grand Prix represented his acceptance among the greats. His challenge was not victory, but qualification for the race. And to make a name for himself, Ratzenberger was prepared to give everything. In the heat of Imola on April 30th, he did just that.
It was in a moment where you are in the car, the helmet on, looking to the monitor, and just waiting for your slot to go out and to do your qualifying lap. And the qualifying lap is very stressful. You take a lot of risk. It's the biggest pressure. At this time, it was the biggest pressure on the whole weekend. So you are really nervous, concentrate. And then suddenly we all had on the screen the accident of Ratzenberger. We all saw Professor Watkins at the time putting a heart massage. And we all know if on a racetrack, if you're into a heart massage, then it doesn't look good at all. So that together all gave us a very hard time. I remember well myself also going out of the car, going back to the motorhome, and asking myself if it would be the right moment to stop.
Ayrton was standing next to me, and we saw Ratzenberger's accident happening live. It was a terrible shot, because we understood that he was dead. And he saw it too. I saw his face collapse. It was in the middle of the session. I saw that something very serious was happening inside him. He went quite pale, and he didn't get back into the car. With drivers at that level, that's quite something. It's very relevant because it's their job, and they know how to evaluate risk. They know exactly what they're doing, and that what happens to some of them doesn't necessarily happen to the others. Ayrton is a highly skilled driver. Nothing had ever happened to him. We mustn't forget that. He was even one of the breed of drivers who were almost invulnerable. And there, before his eyes, a man had died.
Deeply affected, seeing death on the track for the first time, Senna terminates the session. 2 hours after the accident, he goes to the track hospital to ask Dr. Piana for news of Roland Ratzenberger.
I'm shaking my head sadly, and he doesn't say anything. He understands the situation. He turns round without a word and leaves the hospital with his head down. In the days that followed, I met a marshal who said, I saw Senna leaving your hospital. He was going back to the pits, and he was crying. It was a very moving incident, because Senna was concerned about the condition of his compatriot, but also the newest driver, who was still unknown.
What is Ayrton Senna thinking about that Saturday evening? The next day's race? The obligatory victory? Or perhaps back in his modest hotel room, is he thinking about death? The death of Ratzenberger, the rookie, who confronted Formula One with harsh reality after 12 years without a fatality. It had almost been forgotten that drivers could die on the racetrack. Sunday, May 1st, the day of the Grand Prix. Ayrton's 161st race, and his car is on pole position. During the morning's briefing session, a number of drivers led by Senna promised to meet up in Monaco 2 weeks later to discuss track safety. The atmosphere on that Sunday morning in Imola is unusually charged.
Obviously, the atmosphere was gloomy because, hey, a driver had died the day before, but the race was about to take over. From midday onwards, the paddock was functioning quite normally. The motorhomes were full, there were lots of guests, life was back to usual. As the start approaches, it's always a big moment during a Grand Prix when you begin to hear the noise of the engines. In the 30 minutes before the start, the cars come out into position on the grid. All during this period, the tension is mounting. I remember it very well. The weather was amazing. It was beautiful. And we were expecting a great race. And it's true that of Ratzenberger, people were little by little starting to forget.
Has Ayrton, on Sunday morning, already forgotten the Austrian's death? Has the master of concentration moved on?
He would shut himself into a bubble that was very difficult to open up and penetrate. Some of the drivers are very friendly, and you can pat them on the back and say, "Hi, how's it going?" But with him, even if you knew him quite well, there was always that distance you had to respect because he had such a strong personality, and you didn't want to bother him like that.
His mental side was very strong, was stronger than most of us. And his way of concentration was definitely a step ahead of all of us. So the way how he could concentrate over a race or even over a qualifying lap was very impressive.
After the races, he would make some amazing confessions. When he was preparing, he didn't hear anything. He didn't see anyone. At one race in Spain, the first sound he heard was the roar of his engine when the green light went on. Through a form of meditation, he would visualize the circuit beforehand. I was stunned by this ability to conceptualize and mentally program himself that he developed through our work together.
In addition to his concentration, Senna openly admits that he has his faith. He believes in God intensely and proclaims it, like after his first World Championship in 1988.
Eu tive uma experiência muito especial onde eu senti realmente muito forte a presença dele naqueles dias, naquele dia em especial da prova. Eu senti realmente que eu estava com ele, que ele estava comigo. É uma situação que com certeza tanta gente já passou, mas pouca gente tem coragem de dizer porque é uma situação muito delicada. E eu, no entanto, não tenho medo de dizer.
O Ayrton, ele creu muito em Deus.
Ayrton really believed in God, but it wasn't just a mystical thing. He read the Bible.
Ele acreditava que, como o resto
He
da
believed,
família também,
like the rest of his family, in Jesus and God.
Jesus, em Deus, que Deus ajudava muito ele.
And that God helped him very, very much.
Então essa que era a fé dele.
That was his faith in God.
Em Deus. E levava a Bíblia com ele.
He traveled with his Bible.
E à noite no hotel ele lia.
And would read it in his hotel room.
Então, eu acho que foi uma coisa
It was really quite wonderful.
maravilhosa nesse sentido.
He didn't preach, he didn't try to convince or convert anyone. He was quite simply a believer, that's all. He was wrong to talk about it. It was taken the wrong way, but never, absolutely never, did he think he was protected or preserved from any problems because of his beliefs. Definitely not.
It is 1:30. The great Formula One circus takes to the stage. The race is due to start at 2 p.m. Senna has with him a small Austrian flag that he intends to wave at the end of the race as a homage to Roland Ratzenberger. But it is another detail that surprises the observers.
Senna would always stay in his car with his harness attached before the start, and that day too he was in the car, belted up. But there was one small detail, something he did very rarely. He had taken off his helmet so we could see his face, which was very serious.
I knew all the rituals he'd perform before the race. And that day he went against all those rituals. He did everything differently as if he knew what was going to happen, or at least that something was wrong with the car by the way he looked at it. He'd never done that before. A different attitude for the first time in 10 years. That bothered me and affected me. From what I knew about Ayrton, it was as if he had an intuition about something.
The dismal series continues. Immediately after the start, a collision between two cars interrupts the race.
The green light goes on, and there's an accident. A driver mounts another car, there were wheels in the stands, whatever. No one was injured, fortunately, but the race restarted and the Grand Prix was underway somewhat chaotically.
As the debris is cleared from the track, the Formula One racing machines impatiently follow the pace car for 6 laps. Then the pack is unleashed once more. Senna is already in front, pursued by Schumacher. He's heading for the Tamburello curve at more than 300 kilometers an hour. It is 2:18 p.m.
There, on the monitor, we see a car coming off the track and crashing into the wall at Tamburello. I'm watching the monitor closely, and I count up to 8. I realize the driver's not getting out. I stand up, bang my fist on the table, and sound the alert. The driver's not getting out. The driver's not getting out.
I just remember, I just been behind Schumacher. It was Ayrton, Schumacher, myself. And so when I come to Tamburello, he was just in the gravel. Parts was just flying. But you know, it was quite in the exit of the Tamburello. And when I had my accident in the same corner, it was an entry. So I thought the angle should be okay, should be not too bad. And I did not have no clue how bad the accident was.
And then I saw it wasn't a grimace. It was the utter distress on Prost's face. His teeth were clenched as he watched, staring at the wreckage of the Williams and Senna's helmet, not moving. Whether we had any hopes at that point, I have no idea. We saw his helmet move for 1/10 of a second.
A lot of people had the feeling that the slight movement from Senna's head was a good sign. But I really had the impression that it was his last breath, that it was over. And even though the car body was intact, I had that feeling.
We said to ourselves, he's dead. You know, from time to time you have a kind of extrasensory perception. What made us think that? Maybe it was the drama of the moment, maybe the gravity of the moment. Seeing, as I wrote in an article later, that the archangel had been brought down to earth. He had fallen. It was over.
I was at home with my family, and we saw the accident. At first, we were hoping that nothing too serious had happened. Naturally, As time went by, we realized that the situation was much more serious than we thought.
perceber que a situação era muito mais grave do que se imaginava.
At what point were you afraid that it was really serious?
Quando ele não saiu do carro.
When he didn't get out of the car.
E o momento
And during the moments
seguinte,
that followed,
do atendimento dele
when he
na
received
pista.
treatment on the track.
Did you imagine the worst?
Yes,
Achei.
we could envisage the worst.
Achei que podia ter acontecido pior.
Immediately, a medical car stationed close to the Tamburello wall intervenes. On board is Giuseppe Pezzi, the emergency services doctor.
He was bleeding badly and was unconscious, but his pulse was regular, although we could see that the situation was critical.
Was it possible to say that he was dead?
Absolutely, because the patient was alive in the sense that he had a pulse, his respiratory activity was functioning, so the driver was alive, even if he was in a deep coma with obvious cerebral injuries.
E mentre I tre rianimatori presenti,
As three medics tried desperately to resuscitate him, I radioed the race directors and sent the message. Code 3, Charlie on the track. I was implementing the most extreme procedure for an emergency medical intervention on the track, which means a helicopter landing on the track.
It is an exceptional decision. It is 14:35 when Ayrton Senna is transported to the Maggiore Hospital in Bologna.
We couldn't hear the engines anymore. We couldn't hear the noise, not even the spectators. It was very oppressive. And above all, at that moment, we remembered the accident the day before and Barrichello's 2 days previously. And we said, oh no, not Senna. It's awful to say that, but it's true, not him.
After the patient was transferred by helicopter, I returned to my station. Nobody, not even the race officials, dared ask me what I had seen. They saw I had come back on foot, in silence, and so they respected my feelings. Even today, the memories come back with the same emotion, but a great silence.
The race, however, continues to the end, despite another accident when a car runs into three mechanics, one of whom is seriously injured. The show goes on, an absurd farce, culminating in the unlikely podium presentation to celebrate the winner, Michael Schumacher. As an ultimate concession to decency, however, the champagne at Imola that day stays in the bottle. At the hospital in Bologna, all the doctor's efforts are in vain. At 5:30, Senna's heart is still beating, but the Brazilian is soon diagnosed as brain dead. Journalists crowd round the intensive care unit's doors, feverishly waiting for confirmation of what they fear is sadly fated.
In the words of Father Amadeo, who made a report on the events for the religious records at the Maggiore Hospital, in front of the door, many people were waiting to receive news of the condition of the Brazilian driver, who was a great champion. Father Amadeo gave him absolution, dispelled the flames of hell, and prayed, commending him to the Lord. It was almost 6:30, and at 6:40, he was pronounced dead.
The head of the intensive care unit at the hospital in Bologna makes the official announcement of Senna's death in a tense electric atmosphere.
I remember that as I went in, I was swamped by microphones and journalists. He even took me to police officers to make room for me because I couldn't get into the room. The most frustrating thing was that I couldn't respond in any positive manner to the expectations from around the world. And particularly for having been powerless, because there was nothing left to do to snatch this young man from his death. In addition, there was an aspect of heroism. I always say he was a hero. He had one dimension as a driver, of course, but also as a man, and I think he was really a very rare human being.
In my mind, he was immortal. He's not dying. He can't die. I went to pieces because I was a citizen who'd lost a fellow Brazilian, who was almost a son that I'd embrace. So fragile, so weak, and who'd become so strong and powerful. And then there was the professional with 40 years of experience who saw his work broken, lost, destroyed in an instant, in a flash, into nothing, into nothing. It was all over. It was very tough, very difficult, awful for me.
How did Ayrton Senna, the exceptionally gifted champion who would constantly push back the limits, find his trajectory so brutally terminated? The first fingers pointed to the Tamburello curve, a sinister memory for Senna's friend Gerhard Berger, who had himself almost lost his life there 5 years previously.
I went with close to 300 Ks just straight on into the beton wall, and just through a miracle, everything exploded. I was in fire. Just through a miracle, I survived. And I remember well, I've been in the hospital, and Ayrton found me in the hospital, and I say, when I'm back to Imola, we should go to this wall, because this wall, it's really terrible. And you're so fast there, and if you get into this wall, it's just difficult to survive. And the next test, we've been in Imola, Ayrton and myself walked to this corner, to my place where we had the accident, and we looked to move the wall. And we looked behind the wall, and behind the wall is a small river. And we looked both each other and say, we cannot move it because behind is a river. And we left again. And I think 5 meters from this place where we stand and discuss this, he died.
The explanation concerning the wall left fans and experts alike bewildered. Surely only a technical problem could have caused the accident.
It's very difficult to determine if his leaving the track was due to the steering column breaking, which seems to be the case based on all the elements available at the time, or whether it broke afterwards. But we know there was no human error, that Senna was not ill, that he hadn't fainted, which could have been the case. We can see him struggling with the car up to the last moment, working the brakes and the accelerator. Everything he could have done, he did. But what killed him was the extremely unfortunate fact that something penetrated his helmet, going into his head, a piece of metal from the suspension.
If you had to pick one lasting image of Ayrton, what would it be?
Unfortunately, there are 2 or 3 images from that Sunday before the race. The message in the morning, when he came to see me at lunchtime for a couple of minutes, and then when we shook hands, which is pretty unusual just before the race. I happened to walk past him, we looked at one another, we shook hands, and I wished him good luck. I almost wish I hadn't.
That it could touch a driver like Ayrton, who was protected from everything, who was something of an archangel and so ultimately untouchable. We were often in the realm of the superhuman. It was something that brutally brought us down to earth. We realized that something that was utterly unthinkable just seconds before had actually happened. A man had been killed, and for us, whose job is to enable the drivers to race, to practice a sport, it was really something that made us ask some very basic questions about our profession. Why do we do this job? What on earth is this business that can bring about a man's death?
There would be a before and after Senna. His death put an end to the pursuit of sheer performance. Engines would be less powerful and racetracks less dangerous. It took the death of its greatest champion for Formula One to make safety a priority. In Brazil, 3 days of national mourning honored the death of Ayrton Senna before he was laid to rest for eternity in the Morumbi Cemetery in Sao Paulo. Nothing can keep me from the love of God can be read on his headstone in the shade of an ipe tree from Amazonia. A little shade and stillness for a man who perhaps liked nothing more than brilliance and high velocity.